So in the last video, I talked about the Spring Boot roadmap. In that, I told you to learn Spring Framework first to get the understanding of the basics of the Spring Framework and then move ahead with the Spring Boot. So in this video, we are going to learn about the basics of Spring Framework, and we will learn why Spring Framework and what are the benefits of Spring Framework and what are the dependency injections and inversion of control and all those stuffs with the example. So without any further delay, let's get started. If you're new around here, welcome to Daily Code Buffer, and this is Shabir. I will try to teach you whatever I know and whatever I have learned using this all tutorials. Now first, let's see why frameworks first of all, right? So if you're working with any of the programming languages, or in this particular video, let's take the example of Java. Java gives us a lot of features and advantages to build the application. But when we are trying to build the enterprise applications, when you are trying to build the business applications, right, at the time we have to concentrate more on the business logics. At that time, we don't have to work around, or we don't want to work with the basic boilerplate codes or the basic necessities or basic cross-cutting concerns, we can say, right? So we'll be doing many things like security, like logging, like configurations, like batch processing, scheduling, many things, right? So these all things directly doing with Java without any frameworks, it will take a lot of time. So frameworks comes into picture at that time. Like frameworks are the way that will provide a lot of basic structure, basic functionalities that we can work upon, and we can mainly concentrate on our business implementation. So Spring is not the first framework. There are a lot of frameworks available for Java, but why Spring is more popular, that we can understand using the advantages of the Spring framework. So Spring is just the another framework like other frameworks available for Java or the other frameworks available for the other programming languages. It gives us a lot of features so we can work upon. It gives us like logging, security, it gives us dependency injections, it gives us scheduling, batch processing, and a lot of things. There are a lot of modules available within the Spring framework. It's a suite of framework, right? It's also called as framework of frameworks. We'll get to that part later, why it's called frameworks of frameworks. But Spring started as a small project and now it's really huge. So let's see the different features of Spring framework first. So the first thing Spring allows us is to inversion of control. What is inversion of control? Inversion of control is nothing but to give the control to the framework itself. You don't have to take the control yourself. You don't have to create every objects or whatever you want to do in your application by yourself, because consider there are thousands of classes that you have created, and for each and every time you are creating the objects and you are destroying the objects for the garbage collection, it's a tedious job. We have to work on the business logic. What we are doing is we are giving the control to the framework itself. Okay, so that is responsible for doing everything. To do that, Spring allows the dependency injection. So we need to understand what is dependency injection. That will cover in detail later on. In a nutshell, dependency injection is nothing but to give the dependencies of different classes into the different classes. Suppose one class needs the object of the other class, then we will give the control to Spring to add those particular dependencies. We won't be adding those dependencies. We will see later how we can do that as well. The other thing Spring provides us is the aspect-oriented programming, that is Spring AOP. Now, what is aspect-oriented programming? Aspect-oriented programming is nothing but to tackle down the cross-cutting concerns, because when you are building the application, there are a lot of things that we might do repeatedly, like logging the user data, whatever the logs we generate, right? Doing logging in, doing securities. So this type of things that we have to do for each and every request that's coming from the server. So to do those things every time, it's a tedious job. So what we do is we separate out all those cross-cutting concerns and we separate out using the Spring AOP, and we define like whenever this particular things are called or whatever the particular methods are invoked, we have to invoke these particular methods or we have to do this particular operations that we will define or that we can define in the Spring AOP. So that's the Spring AOP part that Spring provides us. The other thing that it provides us the ability to create the web application. So there is a Spring project called Spring MVC that allows us to create the web applications. The other thing is, if you want to work with a database, right? So ideally, if you are directly working with Java, you would be working with a JDBC, and we know that working with JDBC is a really tough thing, right? So Spring provides us the Spring data libraries so that we can connect to the database. So for all the different database that you want to use, for all those things, there are Spring Data projects available. Either you want to use with the MySQL, either you want to use with the Oracle or NoSQL databases, anything. For all those things, there is a project from the Spring framework that you can use to connect to your database, and it would be very easy for you to implement those things. And it also allows us to implement other libraries and other frameworks very easily. Suppose if you want to work with the Hibernate for your database connection or for your ORM, then it allows us very easily to implement Hibernate within the Spring framework. So that's why, because of the ease of implementing other libraries and other frameworks in this Spring framework, it is also known as the frameworks of framework. So by all these particular features, we can understand that Spring Boot is a layer on top of the Java to build our applications. Now, as Spring Boot adds a layer on Java for the developers to make the application very fast, reliably, and with a peace of mind, do the same thing with your identity on internet using VPN. With more than 5,200 servers, amazing speed, and one-click connect, NordVPN gives us a lot of features and security. As a techie, we know that how much important it is to secure our data and identity. With NordVPN's diskless servers and end-to-end encryption, everything is secure, which routes through the NordVPN servers, so no one will know your IP address. And if you want, you can route through 2 VPN servers to double down on your security and protection. And it also enables all the content on Netflix and Amazon Prime. You just change the server to that particular location, and all the contents and your favorite shows will be available to whichever server you have connected to. So I use NordVPN on all my devices. So if you are interested, go to this link or use coupon code DCB to get a 2-year plan plus a huge bonus gift. Check the first link in the description below. Now, to understand more on the dependency injection, let's go to the computer, open IntelliJ IDEA, and I'll show you some code so we can understand more on the dependency injection. So let me just open IntelliJ IDEA. So I'll just create a new project over here, and we will use the Spring Framework dependency in it. So let me just create the new project, and you can create Spring project either using Maven or using Gradle. Both are the excellent build tools. So either one, whichever you are comfortable, you can use. I'm more comfortable with the Maven, so I'll go ahead with the Maven. So here you can just select the Maven project that you want to create, because we are not creating Spring Boot project. We are just focusing on the core Spring framework. So from here, select the SDK. I'm using Java 11. So I'm just selecting the Java 11 over here. And there are a lot of archetypes available, Maven archetypes. So from that, you can directly create the base structure of the Maven project. But we are not going from this. We will be creating entire project from scratch. So click on next over here and give the name of the project. I'll just give Spring Framework demo, and in the artifact coordinates you have to give your details over here. Now your group ID is to identify or to get a unique group ID over here. Now we'll add the group ID over here. Generally we will be writing the domain name in the reverse order to make it unique. So I'll just write com.dailycodebuffer, and the artifact ID would be your name of the project. So with the combination of group ID and artifact ID, your artifact would be unique in the world. And then you can give the version as well. We'll go ahead with the 1.0 snapshot version, and we'll click on finish. And here you can see that the project is created. So this is the pom.xml file of your Maven. This is very important for your project. So let me just close it for now. Let me go to the src folder, main Java, and let me create the package over here. Let me give demo, and let me create the main class over here. Okay, and we'll have the main method as well. Now ideally, when we are working with the Java application, what we do is we create a lot of classes, and whenever we want to use those classes, we create the reference of that particular class and we instantiate that class with the new keyword, right? So the object of that particular class is created, and we can use that class. We can assign some variables for whatever we want to do, or we can call the methods available in that particular class. So that's how generally is been done in the Java application. So suppose for the example, let me just create one class over here. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a class which says doctor, and let me say public void assist. The doctor can assist the other doctors, and I'm just printing out doctor is assisting. So this is just a simple class that I've created, doctor, and there is one method that is assist, which is printing doctor is assisting. Now if I want to use this, what I'll do in the main class, I'll just create the reference doctor equals to, and then I'll instantiate this particular class with the new keyword, that is new doctor, right? And then I can say doctor dot assist. If I run this, this should run, right? Completely fine. Now, what if I want to create a new doctor again? Or what if there are new objects that are to be added to this particular class, right? Because currently, if you see, there is only one doctor. If you go to this particular doctor class, suppose there are different classes created and the objects of those particular classes are required over here, right? Suppose doctor have qualifications, right? So suppose if you're creating the class qualification and you want to use that particular qualification in this doctor class, what you will do, you will just create a qualification reference to it, and whenever you want to create the object for it, either in the getter setters or in the constructor, you will instantiate this particular object using the new keyword. So that thing is bound to this doctor class, right? Because whenever you want a doctor class, you have to have the qualification class. So you can see that those two class, doctor and qualifications, are tightly coupled, right? Because whenever you need a doctor, you need to have a qualification. Without that particular qualification, you cannot create the doctor, because you have directly instantiated the qualification class within the doctor constructor itself. So this is a particular concern that we have to solve, right? And Spring allows us to solve that particular concern. Now to solve this concern, what we have to do is we have to do the loose coupling. You might have heard this term, right? Tight coupling and loose coupling. So we have to create a loose coupling within the objects that we are creating. So that means if you want to work with directly qualification, you should be able to work. And if you want to directly work with a doctor, you can work. And if qualification is available, that's fine. We can use the qualification. If qualification is not available, we can still create the doctor, right? Ideally, it should not be, right? But here to understand, we can create the object. And the other thing why we have to do the loose coupling is for the unit testing. We will be creating a huge projects, and to test it everything every time is not possible. So what we do, we separate down, or we create a different component, small components, and we try to test those small components. We do the unit testing of those components and we try to build the application. So that means if we create a doctor class over here separately and we create the qualification class also separately, we should be able to test both of them separately, and we should be able to test both of them together also. So that type of thing should be possible, and that's the design principle that we should follow. So to achieve this, to do the loose coupling, dependency injections comes into picture from Spring. So what it allows us to do is we can create the different classes, and we just tell Spring like, these are the classes I have. And what Spring will do is Spring will try to reference all the classes. So it will have the graph of reference, right? It will have like this particular object is connected to this particular class. This is a separate class. This is connected to this particular class. So this all reference graph it will have, Spring will have, and it will try to match everything. So you don't have to do anything. So you don't have to use a new keyword to create the objects or anything. We just have to annotate it, or we can do the XML configuration as well, that this particular class might need this or may need this particular object. So we'll just define everything like a blueprint. So we'll just create a blueprint like this is all I need, and Spring will take care of everything, like whenever the objects are there, to creating the objects and to inject all the objects whenever it is required. So everything Spring will take care of. So that is, we are giving the control to the Spring. So that is the inversion of control, and dependency injection is the process that we are doing. So let's understand how to do this dependency injection. There are different ways that we can do dependency injection: constructor based, setter based, and we can do via XML configuration as well, and then we can do via annotation based as well, and we can do via Java configuration as well. So we'll see how we can do via XML configuration, how we can do via annotation based configuration, and how we can do via Java configuration. So let's see how we can do this. So I'll just remove this for now because I don't need this, and let me go to the main class, and I don't need let it keep this way, right? So now to work with the Spring, we need to add the dependency. So to add the dependency, what we have to do is we have to go to the pom.xml file, and here we have to define the dependencies. What all the dependencies that we need, we can define here, and we can add the dependencies. So what I'll do, I will go here and I will add the dependencies. Okay, inside dependencies, I need to add the dependency. So I'll just add the dependency tag. Okay, in this particular dependency, you can see that you have to provide the artifact and the group ID. That too would be unique. So I just want Spring context dependency, and that is from the group org.spring framework, and the version that I want to use is 5.3.14. Okay, currently Spring Framework 5 is the latest one, and within few months Spring Framework 6 also will get released, but the base will remain the same, right? This tutorial will be applicable at that particular time as well. And once you add this, you can just refresh the Maven dependencies, and Maven will try to get all the dependencies in your local repository. There will be a central repository as well for Maven, and it will try to fetch all the jar files whichever we have defined over here, and it will create the local repositories so it can give you the content from there directly. So this one dependency is created now. Now if I go to this particular main class, so now we need to understand, okay, Spring will create all these particular beans, right? But from where to get all these things, right? So what Spring does is, whenever you start the application, Spring will load all the beans and it will store all the beans in the container, right? So we can get all the beans from the container itself. So there are two interfaces available, that is Bean Factory and application context. From that we can try to get all the beans which are loaded and we can use those particular beans. So we don't have to use the new keyword to get the object, and we can use that particular object. So let's try to understand that. Now what's the difference between Bean Factory and application context? Application context extends Bean Factory, so there are a lot more features within the application context. Now if you want to know the exact differences, you can go to the documentation and you can go through everything, but here we will be using the application context for now. For that I will link the article in the description below. So let me just create the object of application context, and here you can see that it is part of the org.springframework.context package. Okay, and I'll create the context object equals to new, and here you can see that there are a lot of different ways that we can get the Spring context, but here we have to go with the XML based configuration because we will try to use the XML based configuration. So here there is a class called class path XML application context, so we will be using this one, and as we are using class path XML application context, we need to create the XML configuration for it. So let's create the XML for it. So and that particular XML has to be in the class path, so whatever it would be in the resources folder, it will be in the class path because everything is in the main, right? So let me just create the XML file, and I'll just say it's spring.xml. So we just define the XML version over here, and then we have to define the beans, because whatever the classes or whatever the objects that we'll be creating, all those will be called beans in the Spring. So all the objects are beans, and we can get those particular beans from the Bean Factory or the application context, wherever the container, whatever the container is holding those things. So we need to have beans, but it's XML, it doesn't have the XSD to understand it. So we need to provide the namespace and those particular information in the XML. So what I'll do, I'll just copy paste the details from the documentation, and this particular namespace and everything will depend on the Spring version that you are using. So currently I'm using 5.3.14. Hopefully that's the one, right? Yeah. So accordingly, I'll add the beans tag over here. So don't worry, it's very easy to find. If you just Google it, Spring Bean XML, you will get it and you can directly use it. Okay. So this is what I have done. You need to create the beans tag, and within this beans tag, we can create the beans. So whatever the classes that we are creating or we will be creating, we can define over here. And this particular context, this particular XML file, we need to provide to our class path. So what I'll do, I'll just provide, this is spring.xml. It's simple thing that we created the context from the spring.xml. So whatever the beans are defined over here, we can get those particular beans from the context. So how we can get, we can directly do context.getBeans method. Okay. So from here we can say, okay, I want a bean of type doctor. Simple thing, right? So in this particular factory, whatever the beans are there for the doctor class type, we will get that particular bean and we can use this particular bean. So if you run this, let's see what happens. And it should fail, obviously. You can see that no such bean definition exception, because Spring still doesn't know that I have to create this bean, because we just created the class over here, but we have to define that this class, whatever I've defined, that's a bean that you have to use. So that thing we have to define in the Spring XML itself. So what we will do is we'll create a bean tag, and in this particular bean tag we will say which class we want to use. We want to use demo.doctor. Okay, and for every bean that we define, we need to make it as unique. So we will define the ID. So I'll just define that ID is doctor. So we just define the bean. Now if we go and check, and if we run the application again, it should work, right? You can see we got the bean from the context itself and it is executing. Cool, right? Let's try to create one more object. So what I'll do, I'll just create one more class that says nurse. Okay. And this also has the same method. Let me just copy it from here. And I can say nurse is assisting. Okay. If I go to main over here and if I say I just need nurse over here, and this is also nurse. Okay. So instead of doctor, we'll get the object of nurse, and we got the error because we have not defined the bean. So let's go ahead and define the bean as well. So we'll go to the Spring XML over here, and let me just define one more bean. Bean class equals to demo.nurse, and I'll give the ID as well. ID equals to nurse. Okay, let me run this again, and you can see that it should work. Now if you see over here, we are defining the type over here, right? That I want the class of a type nurse, but instead of that, you can get the values from the ID also that you have provided. If I just say nurse, so here you can see that it will get the data as an object because it doesn't know the type yet. So we can do the casting. Okay. And if we do this way also, then we should also get the object. You can see that it is working completely fine. Now generally this is not the way that we create the applications, right? Because we'll be having the lot of complex structures, right? So let's make it something complex. Let's add the hierarchy. So this nurse and this doctor belongs to the staff of the hospital. So let me just create the staff interface over here. Staff is the interface, and this staff interface has method void assist. Okay, nurse and doctor both implements staff. I'll go to the doctor as well, and doctor also implements staff. Now doctor and nurse both are part of the staff and both have implemented this assist method. And now I have added both these beans also in the Spring context in the XML file. Now if I go to the main.java file, and instead of doctor, I just need the staff to assist. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just say staff over here, and I want staff to assist. Now instead of this, what I want is I want the object of doctor for now. So I can say doctor.class. Now this doctor.class should be assigned to the staff, and we should be able to call the method. Pretty good, right? Now either from the doctor we can change to nurse as well, and we should be good here. Now you can see here, right? It's pretty simple. We just decouple the entire application. You can see we are not creating the objects. We are not injecting the objects. We are just getting everything from the container itself, Spring container itself. And we define what are the beans that I have in the XML file. Now if you see, these are just a simple classes. What if we have some properties? So let me go to the doctor class, and let's see if I add properties. Private string qualification. And for basic Java class, if there is any properties that we are defining, we'll be having the getters and setters. So let me create the getters and setters for this. Okay, these are the getters and setters created. Now what will happen over here is Spring will try to create the object that is doctor, right? So it will create the object, but it doesn't know that it has a property qualification, right? Or what value to add to the qualification, right? It will try to add the default value that is null. So if you want to do that, we can inject those particular values of the properties from the XML file itself. So if you go over here, and if you see, if I want to add some of the properties, that's the setter injection that we are doing. If I want to add the properties, I can add using the properties tag over here. And you can see that the property is qualification, and the value that I want to give is suppose MBBS. Okay. So this is the value of the property that I have provided to the doctor class. So if we go to this particular class, and if I let me just change to doctor for now. Okay, and I also need to change to doctor. And if I do s out staff dot get qualification, I should get the qualification. You can see that I got the qualification, that is MBBS. So the value MBBS was injected via setters from the XML itself. Now suppose what if you want to inject the entire object itself, right? So suppose just for simplicity I'm doing over here. Suppose if you want to add the object of nurse over here, okay? So private nurse. This should not happen, but just for simplicity to understand, I'm just showing you over here that suppose if you need the object of nurse or whatever over here, what you will do over here is you just define over here nurse, okay? And if you want to inject the value of nurse, so you will go to the spring.xml file. You have already defined the bean. You have to define the bean, right? Then only Spring will understand it. So the bean you have defined over here, and here if you are doing with a constructor argument, you can go ahead with the constructor args tag over here. But here we are just adding the properties. We can add properties, and it doesn't have the value because we need to add the getter setters over here. So let me just add the getter setters. So now you can see we are getting the nurse over here. So now you can see that in the first one we added the static values because we had a value defined, so we just use the values attribute over here. Here we need to use the ref attribute. So we have to reference the nurse object that we have created over here. So the entire object from here will be injected to this particular doctor class over here, doctor object over here, right? So here you can see that we are just defining the definition, like this is what I want. Spring will take care of everything. We are not using any instantiation anywhere like new keyword or whatever is available in the Java, right? Everything is done by Spring. So that's the beauty of Spring framework. So let me just remove it because I don't want it. I just added here to show you that we can use this way as well. Let me go to the doctor. Let me remove this property. If I go back to the Spring XML, if I remove this as well, and if I want to use the constructor based, then I can use using the constructor arguments, and I can give value equals to MBBS. So it will add to the first property. Okay, I need to remove this. Let me just remove this. Go to the main and run this again. We wanted the error and we got it because you can see Spring could not resolve the matching constructor. So yeah, you can see that we have defined like this particular bean of doctor will have a constructor that's have one argument, but we have not created the constructor. So we need to create a constructor. So if you go to the doctor and if you create the constructor, if I say constructor with qualification, this is the constructor created. Now if I go to the main, if I run this, you can see that I should get the value that is MBBS. So this was injected using the constructor injection. The earlier which we saw using the properties was the setter injection. This was using the constructor injection. So these are the two ways that we can use to inject the values to our beans. Now let's try to do with the annotation based configuration. This was the XML based configuration that we did. There is also another way that we can implement this using the annotations. Within the recent Spring frameworks, you will see everywhere that annotations would be used. Now to use the annotation based configuration, what I'll do, I will just comment this beans out because I'll add the annotations for it. And now after commenting, if I go to the main class, okay, I'm just using the doctor for now, and let me go to the doctor class over here and let me just remove this everything. Okay, let's try this simple thing first. It has the assist method, and from the main as well, I'll just remove this. Now to use the annotations, we have to mark this as a Spring component. Okay, that's it. So what we are telling Spring is that whatever the class that we have created is the component that you can use to create the beans out of it. That's it, right? If we try to run it again, let's see what happens. And it should fail actually. And here you can see that it failed over here because Spring doesn't know yet, like you just created the class, you defined like it's a component, but where I should search that, right? So we need to define that. Search here, you will get the components. So we will go to the spring.xml and we have to define that. We need to search the base package. So here what I'll do, here I'll define context component scan over here. Okay, like in which base package I want to search. I'll just say that in the demo package every components are there, so search there whatever the components that you are getting, try to load those components. So we just defined over here, and we have just removed every bin definitions and everything, and we just added the component over here. Now if I go to the main class and if I run this again, I should get the doctor object. You can see we got the doctor object. But if we try to get the nurse object, right, let me try to get the nurse, and this is staff. And if I run this, you can see that we got the error because Spring doesn't know that nurse is a component yet. It only knows that doctor is a component. If I run this, doctor should come. Right? Doctor is coming. So to make nurse also as a component, we can also annotate with @component. That's it. Simple, right? So this is the annotation based configuration. There are a lot of different annotations specific to the specific needs available. You can see it's a stereotype annotation. So there are a lot of different annotations available. So once you explore the different tools or projects in the Spring framework, then you will get to know more about the different annotations also. So you can understand that this is the way that Spring handles the annotation based configuration as well. The other thing is we can handle using the Java configuration as well. So let's try to create the Java configuration. So for Java configuration, we have to create a configuration class. So let me just create the Java class that says bean config. Okay. And this particular bean config, I need to annotate with @configuration. You can see that it's part of the context annotation, and it will try to say Spring that this is the configuration, that whatever the configuration has been defined, we need to act accordingly. Now what I will do, I will here also say the same thing that you say in the XML. So in the XML, whatever currently it is there, right? Currently you can see that we have defined only one thing. This is not the XML. This is the Spring.xml, right? Currently we have defined only one thing, that is component scan, where we need to scan the components. The same thing we will define in our bean config. We are not going to define the other beans for now. I'll just say component scan over here, and where to scan. I'll just say base package equals to demo. That's it. Okay, this is a simple thing that we did over here. Now if you go to the main.java file, here instead of class path application context, we need to use this particular configuration that we are using. So let me just comment it out over here, and I'll use the different context. Okay, I'll say application context equals to new, I'll just say annotation config application context, and here I'll define bean config.class. This is the class that defines the configuration for my annotations. So it will refer to this particular bean config class, and it says, okay, this is a configuration class, and we need to scan demo as the base package, and whatever the components are there, we need to load those components. That's it. We'll go to the main. We are not using the XML now. We are using the bean config. If you run this, it should work completely fine. And you can see that it's working fine. Now the other thing also that we saw in the XML is when we had not defined this component scan, we had defined the beans, right? So this also we can do using the configuration. So if we go to the bean config, and here for the same thing, what I'll do, I'll just remove this, okay, for now. That I don't want, okay, let it be. What I'll do, I'll just say public method which will return doctor. I'll say this is also doctor, and I'll say return new doctor. So here you can see that I just created the method over here, that is the public doctor which is returning the new object of the doctor. And you can, and what I'll say, I'll just say this is the bean that you need to load. Okay, so whenever you're loading anything, this is the bean that you need to load. And to make this work, what I'll do, I will remove the component from here. This is not the component now. I'm defining bean myself in the configuration. This is the bean of type doctor that I need. Simple thing, right? And if I go to the main, this should work the same way, because whenever it will try to load the bean configuration, there is a method that has been defined as a bean. So this will be acted as a bean. The new doctor will be created with a default constructor, that whatever I'm defining over here, and it will be available in the container. Let me just run this. It should work. Cool, right? So this is the way that whatever we define in the XML, we can define here as well. The same thing, whatever you did in the XML configuration, like constructor injection, setter injection, everything is the same way. You have to define this way, either with the bean or you can annotate with the component. Make it as a component and it will be available in the context. Now let's understand about the different scopes available in the Spring Bean. So whenever the Spring is creating the beans, we need to define how those particular beans we want, right? There are 5 different types of scopes available in Spring Bean. By default, all the beans will be created using the singleton scope. So for each and every class, there will be only one single object available in the entire application. So by default, that's the thing that Spring is going to do. But if you want, we can ask for the different types of scope as well. So there are 5 scopes available, that is singleton, prototype, request, session and global session. The other 3, that is request, session and global session, are used mainly when there is a web aware context available. So that is when we are implementing the Spring MVC. But we can still go ahead and see the singleton and prototype design patterns and how to define the different scopes of Bean in the Spring application. So default is singleton, which will always result into one particular object in the entire application, and prototype is you will get a different object every time when you request the object from the container. Request is used when you need one object or you need a different object for each and every request that you receive in the application. So currently, let's try to see the current scope, that is the singleton scope by default available, and see what it happens. So whenever we do any changes, that changes should reflect to all the particular objects that we get. So here what I'll try to do is I'll go to the doctor class and I'll add the qualification again. And I'll add the get status for it. Okay, and I'll also generate the toString method. Okay, this is the 2 things that I have done over here, that I have added the qualification property, added the get status for it, and I have overridden the toString method over here. And if I go to the main class over here and let me just say I need a doctor. Okay, let me convert this to doctor and doctor.assist. Okay, that's fine. Now what I'll do, I'll just try to do sout doctor. Okay, and let me run the application. Currently you can see that I'm getting doctor is assisting and I'm getting doctor qualification is null. But before that, let me just set the doctor.set qualification to MBBS. So I just set the MBBS as a qualification and I'm getting the qualification as well. Now after this, let me try to get the object again. So I'll just say doctor1 equals to context dot get bean. I need doctor.class, and I'll do system.out.println doctor1. Simple thing, right? I just took the object doctor over here and then I added the qualification, and after that I'm getting the doctor again from the container. And if I run this again, you should see that I'm getting the same object back, right? I have set the value over here and I'm getting the object back again, because by default is the singleton design pattern implemented for all the beans, scope of the beans. So Spring is creating only one object for the entire application and I am getting the same object. And if you want to change it, right, so you can go ahead to the doctor class over here and you can write with @scope. Okay, you can define the scope over here and you can see that there is a scope name available, and if you define singleton, then this will be your default scope, that will be singleton. And if you want to change the scope, suppose I want to change the scope of this particular bean to prototype, then I can go ahead and change to prototype. When I change this to prototype, for every time when I try to get the object from the container, I'll get a new object. So if I go to the main again, if I run this, for my second object, I should not get the MBBS, because that should be the new object where MBBS is not set, because in only first object I have set the values. So if I run this, so you can see that we got the MBBS in both the objects because we have not added the component over here. We have to make this as a component. So once I make this as a component, and if I go to the bean config, let me just remove this bean for now. Now everything is coming from the component of a doctor that sets the scope as a prototype. And if I run this again, let me go to the main.java, and then if I run this, I should get MBBS for the first and null for the second. So that means based on the scope that we defined, Spring will create the objects and it will return the objects accordingly from the container. So now we understood how to create the beans, how to define the different scopes. We need to understand the life cycle of a bean as well, and what are the ways that Spring gives us to do any modification in that particular life cycle. So in the Spring life cycle, there are 7 different steps. The first thing is the definition of a bean, that you will define that these are the beans that we need to create, and after that Spring will try to instantiate those beans. So that's the bean creation or the instantiation process, that particular step in the life cycle. After that, it will try to populate the properties. So whatever the ID that you have provided, what are the different scopes that you have provided, or the default values or whatever that you have provided for that particular bean, Spring will try to add those particular or set those particular values. So the next step is the post initialization step. In this step, whatever the aware interfaces that you have implemented, those particular interfaces will be executed, like whatever the custom execution that you want to do in the bean lifecycle, that particular will be executed. So after that, bean would be ready to serve. All the dependencies and everything would be injected and the bean would be ready and would be available in the container. And the next 2 steps are the destruction of the beans. The 6th step is to pre-destroy. So whenever a particular bean is trying to get destroyed, right? So whenever any cleanup is happening, at that time, if you want to execute any custom logic, like to delete some data or to release the connection or to close the file or anything, at that particular time, you will define your custom implementation in the pre-destroy phase. And then the last step would be bean destroyed. At this particular time, bean will be destroyed from the JVM itself. So this is the Spring Bean lifecycle where all these particular steps have been mentioned and what happens at what particular step. So if you want to do any modification, then how we can do the modification, that we need to understand. So from this diagram, you can see that once the bean definition is been passed, that particular bean will be instantiated, and then after that, it will populate all the properties, and after that, all the aware interfaces which are there, those will be executed. There are different aware interfaces. So the bean name aware would be executed first, then it would be bean factory aware, then application context aware, then pre-initialization bean post processor process will happen, and then initializing beans after property set will be executed, and after that, if there is any custom methods, then those particular custom methods will be executed, and after that, post initialization process will happen, and at that particular time, bean will be ready to use. And when the container shuts down, disposable beans destroy method will be executed, and then any custom method is there and custom destroy method that will be executed, and then the bean will be cleared from the JVM. Now, why we need to implement custom methods in the bean lifecycle? Suppose assigning a default values, right? So whenever you want to create any bean, if you want to give some default values like file path or anything, at that time we can use this particular custom methods to inject those values. If you want to open or close the files, or if you want to open a DB connection and close the DB connection when the object is created and destroyed, so at that particular lifecycle points, we can create the custom methods and we can create the connection and we can destroy the connection. And if you want to start the threads or destroy the threads at the time of construction and destruction of the beans, for those purpose also we can use these particular custom methods in the bean lifecycle. So these are just the different examples that I have given you. At these particular places, this bean lifecycle can be very handy. So let's see in the code how we can do this. So the first thing we'll do is we will implement one aware interface. Okay, so in the doctor class, what I'll do, I will try to, let me use bean name aware. Okay, and for this I need to implement the method. So let's go ahead and implement the set bean name method, and this is the method. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just do a out over here, and I'll just say set bean name method is called. Okay, simple thing. Let's go ahead and run this. Let's just comment this out. And you can see that before creating the object, set bean name method was called, and after that, doctor is assisting, this particular method was called. Okay, so this way we can implement all the different aware interfaces which are available to modify the behavior of the lifecycle. The other thing also we can do is to use the annotations. So suppose once the object is created, right, at that particular time, if you want to call anything, what we will do, we will create one method, public void, and we'll say post construct, and I will say s out post construct method is called. Okay, and I need to annotate with @post construct, but that particular annotation is available in the JavaX annotation API, so we need to add the dependency for that. So let me just go ahead and add the dependency. Let's say javax dot annotation API, which is part of javax dot annotation, and the version is 1.3.2. Let me just refresh the maven, and if I go to the doctor again, if I do post construct, now that it is available. If I go to the main, if I run this, I should get it. You can see that the name was called first, and then after that post construct method was called, and after that object was created, and I was able to execute this object. The same way you can go ahead and implement the pre-destroy method as well. So this way you can add the custom method implementation for your Bean lifecycle. So this was all about the Spring framework and the dependency injection, what are the different features available, and how we can use Spring framework for our advantages. If you know these basics and if you know these concepts very well, then you will be able to understand any of the libraries available within the Spring ecosystem, because for everything this is the base. So next I'll try to create a video on Spring AOP, that is the aspect oriented programming, so be subscribed to check that video as well. And if you have any doubts or any queries related to any of the topics that we have covered, then do let me know in the comment section below. And I said earlier as well, if you want to protect your identity and if you want to securely browse everything, then do check out the NodeVPN. I'll add the link and the code in the description below, so you can check that out as well. So that's it in this video. If you want to support me, then click on the join button and join my channel, and also give a like on this video and subscribe to my channel for the upcoming awesome videos. I will see you in the next video. Till then, happy coding. Bye bye.